My wife and I live in a duplex in Queens, New York. About a month ago, two older women moved into the other side of the house. They were middle-aged, maybe older, and very quiet. We never formally met them. For the first few days, they were constantly coming and going, rarely staying inside for long. On the fourth day, I finally ran into one of them while she was carrying a box from her car. I stepped outside to greet her. Her name was Frances. She seemed polite, normal enough, but distracted, almost nervous, like she didn't want to be standing there. I didn't keep her long. The next day was Christmas Eve. My wife and I were hosting my sister and her family. Dinner was going smoothly, laughter, conversation, nothing out of the ordinary, until we all went quiet at the same time. Someone was trying to open our front door, not knocking, not ringing the bell, pushing it. I got up and opened the door. By the time I did, no one was standing on the stoop, but I saw a woman walking away down the sidewalk. Someone started to call out to her, but stopped mid-word. We decided not to bother. Probably the wrong house. That's what I told my family when I sat back down. Wrong house. Everyone left around 9. My wife and I started cleaning up. I was washing dishes when I heard the front door open, and then slam shut hard enough to make the walls vibrate. At first, I assumed it was my wife, or maybe one of my sisters coming back for something they forgot. Then I called out. My wife answered from the bedroom. I turned off the sink, dried my hands, and walked into the living room. A woman was sitting in my recliner. She was facing the wall, not the TV, just staring at it, mumbling to herself in a low, constant whisper, like she was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. I recognized her immediately. She was one of the women from next door. My wife entered the room and gasped. I calmly told the woman she was in the wrong house. She slowly turned her head toward me. Her eyes didn't really focus. She just looked through me and kept muttering. It was obvious something was wrong. I told my wife to go next door and get Frances. She came back almost immediately. Frances looked relieved, too relieved. She grabbed the woman by the arm and pulled her out of our house without a word. A minute later, Frances came back to apologize. She explained that her sister had something called sundowning syndrome, a form of dementia that gets worse as the day goes on. I asked her something that felt important. Does she ever get aggressive? Frances hesitated. Then she said, "It's best to just leave her alone at night when she starts acting up." I didn't like that answer. After she left, my wife and I just stared at each other. This time, I made sure the door was locked. The next night, we went to my wife's parents' house for Christmas dinner. We got home late, around 11. We watched a Christmas movie in bed and eventually fell asleep. Sometime later, I woke up. The room was completely dark. I could tell something had disturbed my sleep, but I didn't know what. Then I saw movement. A figure was walking out of our bedroom and into the hallway. "Honey, are you okay?" My wife murmured beside me, half asleep. She was still in bed. I jumped up and looked into the hallway. There she was. Tall, lanky, barefoot. The woman from next door. She noticed me standing there. I yelled, "Wrong house," and slammed the bedroom door shut, locking it. I could hear her walking back down the hall. Then she tried to open the door. She pushed, she shoved. She made these low, angry sounds, frustrated, animal-like. I called the police and told them our neighbor with dementia had broken in and might be violent. I asked them to wake Frances and bring her over. Waiting was unbearable. When the police finally arrived, I opened the door. Frances came in with them, shaking and apologizing. Her sister was in our basement, wandering around, confused. She had no idea how she got there. Frances took her back next door again. She thanked me repeatedly for not hurting her sister. I told her firmly that this could never happen again. If it did, I would press charges. From that night on, we locked everything: doors, windows, basement access. Eventually, Frances's sister went to live with their mother. Thank God. But even now, sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still expect to see someone standing in the hallway, trying to remember which house is theirs. We never turned the lights back on after that night. My father had always loved going overboard with Christmas lights when I was little. He was extremely perfectionist, making sure our house was the most impressive on the block every single year. 2024 was no exception. He programmed the lights with timers to flash in sync with Christmas songs, a trend that had become very popular the year before. As always, people stopped in front of our house to record videos. My father loved being watched. That night, snow was falling lightly and the temperature was below freezing, so there weren't many onlookers. Only one couple caught our attention, a woman and a man. The woman left after a few minutes, but the man stayed. He stayed far too long. He stood on the sidewalk, staring at the lights with a fixed smile on his face. He didn't do anything else. He just stared. I knew that, deep down, my father liked the attention. As time passed, the snow began to fall harder. It was getting late, so my father went outside and unplugged the lights. The music stopped abruptly, and the house fell completely silent. That was our signal that the night was over. We all went to our rooms. I went upstairs and, out of curiosity, looked out the window to see if anyone else still had their lights on. Only a couple of houses did, but then I saw him. The man was still there, standing in front of our house, even though all the lights were now off. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I quietly called my dad. He came to the window and looked with me. "What do you think he's doing?" I asked. My dad didn't answer right away. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe he's waiting for the lights to come back on. Or maybe something's wrong with him." He told me to close the blinds and ignore him, saying he would eventually leave. I tried to sleep. I could hear snowflakes hitting the window, a sound that had always been comforting to me. But that night, I couldn't close my eyes. Curiosity was eating away at me. I lifted the blinds slightly. The man was gone. But there were fresh footprints in the snow in our front yard. They started at the sidewalk and led straight to our front door. My heart began to pound. Without thinking, I tiptoed downstairs to the front door. It had 3 small glass windows near the top. I slowly stepped closer and looked through one of them. I wish I hadn't. He was standing on the other side of the door. He was staring directly at the glass, wearing a wide smile that emphasized his wrinkles and crow's feet. He had a mustache, an old-fashioned wool cap, and a long black coat covered in snow. His breath fogged up the glass, but the worst part was his eyes. They didn't blink. I only looked at him for a few seconds before falling backward and screaming. The entire house woke up. My father ran downstairs and opened the front door. The man was gone. We only saw him walking quickly down the street, heading toward the park. My father, my brother, and I ran outside without even putting on our coats. We followed his footprints across the street and into the trees of the park. The cold was unbearable, like thousands of needles piercing our skin. But beneath the trees, there was less snow. The footprints slowly faded until they disappeared completely. We had no choice but to give up and go home. Technically, we don't know if that man did anything illegal. He never came back, and we never found out who he was. But after that night, my father stopped putting up Christmas lights. And sometimes I wonder if that man really left, or if he simply learned how to wait in the dark. I was on my way home after working a graveyard shift on Christmas Eve. It was snowing heavily and the roads were icy and slick. I drove slowly and carefully, listening to Christmas music, trying to stay awake. There were almost no cars on the road, just the occasional snowplow passing by. I was driving along a quiet service road when I came to a red light. 2 cars were stopped in front of me. The light quickly turned green, but neither of them moved. I'm not the type of person who honks, ever. But after about 30 seconds of no movement, I finally tapped my horn. Nothing happened. The car directly in front of me didn't honk either. Another 20 seconds passed and I honked again. That's when I noticed someone standing on the sidewalk, watching all of this. I figured he was probably thinking the same thing I was. What the hell is wrong with the driver in the front car? We had been sitting there so long that the light turned red again. Like I said, I'm not confrontational. I would never normally get out of my car, but I was exhausted, cold, and just wanted to go home. So I got out and walked up to the car in front of me. For the record, the engine was still running. Both cars were. I knocked on the window and looked inside. The car was empty. I walked to the car in front of it. That one was empty too. 2 running cars, blocking a lane, with no one inside either of them. No signs of an accident, no explanation. I was about to ask the guy on the sidewalk if one of the cars belonged to him, but when I looked back to where he had been standing, he was gone. The light turned green again. I didn't care anymore. I drove around both cars using the opposite lane and got out of there as fast as I could. I was far too unsettled to stick around. A few blocks down, I noticed a police car parked in an empty parking lot. I missed the entrance, so I started honking my horn and flashing my headlights to get the officer's attention. It worked. He turned his car on, pulled out of the lot, and drove up behind me. It felt almost like I was being pulled over. He got out and walked up to my window. I stayed in my car out of respect and lowered the window. I told him about the 2 abandoned cars blocking the road. He thanked me and said he'd check it out. Then his expression changed. He looked past me toward the back seat. "Why is he laying on the floor like that?" he asked. "What?" I said. I turned around. There was a hooded man lying on the floor of my back seat. I screamed. I jumped out of the car, yelling that I didn't know him. The officer immediately drew his gun and ordered the man to step out with his hands raised. The man slowly did as he was told. When he was handcuffed, I finally got a clear look at his face. It was the same man who had been standing on the sidewalk earlier, I told the officer. He called for backup, shook my hand, and told me he'd take care of the rest. He told me to get home safe. We wished each other a Merry Christmas. I drove home shaken, confused, and exhausted. But that Christmas, I gained a newfound appreciation for the police. Christmas has always been a stressful time of year for me. 2 Christmases ago, my kids still believed in Santa Claus. Earlier that night, we watched the Polar Express together as a family. After that, my wife tucked the kids into bed and went downstairs to place the presents under the tree. I didn't help much. I stayed in bed watching TV, waiting for her to come back upstairs. By the time she was done, we were both exhausted. We're early sleepers, and I'm usually out within minutes. That's why it confused me when I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night. Then I realized why. My daughter Kelsey was standing next to my bed, softly saying, "Daddy, Daddy." I rubbed my eyes and asked her what was wrong. She had a wide, excited smile on her face. "Santa's here," she whispered. Half asleep, I smiled back and told her that yes, he was. I gently told her she needed to be quiet and hurry back to her room so Santa wouldn't know she was awake. She giggled, said okay, and walked out of my room, leaving the door slightly open. I laid back down, trying to fall asleep again. A couple of minutes later, I heard movement downstairs, soft shuffling sounds. I sighed, already annoyed. Kelsey had tried to sneak down early the year before to open presents. I figured she was doing it again. Reluctantly, I got out of bed and headed toward the stairs. As soon as my feet hit the steps, the noise stopped, completely. I reached the bottom and stepped into the living room. The Christmas tree lights were still on, glowing softly in the dark. All the presents were still neatly under the tree. None of them had been touched. I walked through the living room and dining room, quietly whispering Kelsey's name, checking corners, behind furniture. Nothing. Confused, I went back upstairs. Before returning to my bedroom, I decided to check Kelsey's room. She was sitting straight up in bed, wide awake. I asked her why she went downstairs after I told her to go back to sleep. She whispered excitedly, "It wasn't me, Santa's down there." I tried to respond, but my voice caught in my throat. I froze. Then I ran. I sprinted down the stairs and flipped on every light in the house. I searched every room until I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The back door was wide open. Someone had unlocked it. Someone had been inside our house on Christmas Eve while we were all asleep. A few of the presents under the tree were gone. According to my wife, that was the worst part. But for me, the worst part was something else. I heard whoever was down there, and my 7-year-old daughter heard them too. She heard them well enough to come into my room, smile at me, and warn me, and that thought still haunts me to this day. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more horror like this, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps a lot.